Okay, so we're on Daf 133, Kuf Lamed Gimel,
Okay.
and the topic tonight is going to be Brit Milah, continuing like yesterday. And the topics will include Brit Milah that we do on if there is a leprosy spot, is one topic. Second topic is Brit Milah on Yom Tov. And then we're going to get to the next Mishnah, which is going to give a detailed description of the process of Brit Milah itself, because it's going to talk about all the things that you can do. And so it will give us a lot of interesting detail about the steps of Brit Milah. Okay, so we get started here with Amar Mod, which is always a quotation from something that we said previously. And so previously we quoted this tradition that Besar Afapi sheyesh sham baheret yimol divrei Rabbi Yoshia. The word besar, which occurs twice in the Torah, twice regarding Brit Milah, once in Bereshit Yud Zayin, Ba'arel Zachar asher lo yimor et besar orlato v'nichreta hanefesh hahi. And this talking about the rabbis learn an adult, because it says he gets a punishment karet for neglecting to do Brit Milah. And that's one. And the other one is in Parashat Tazria, Ubayom Shemini Yimol Besar Orlato. On the 8th day, he does Brit Milah, and obviously that's talking about a baby. Okay, so the word Besar, because you didn't have to say it, you could have just said Yimol Orlato. What is the word Besar coming to add? Even though there is a white spot that indicates sarat on the foreskin, still you do Brit Milah, even though there's a prohibition for cutting off a nega. You still do the Brit Milah. Okay, so now we ask about that tradition. Why do I need a pasuk to tell me that I'm allowed to do Brit Milah, even though I'm going to cut off the nega? After all, I'm not intending to do so. And so anything that I do without it, I have intention for something else entirely. My intention is to perform Brit Milah. I'm not intending to cut off the spot. And so it should be mutar because it's davar she'eno mitkaven. So why do I need the pasuk? So we have two answers. Amar Abaye la nisracha ela Rabbi Yehuda. Amar davar she'mitkaven asur. Rabbi Yehuda, his general opinion, we saw it many times regarding a Chot Shabbat, that even if it's not your main intention, if it's going to happen, then you're still not allowed to do it. And so he says that about Shabbat, but also about other things. So even though your main intention is to do Brit Milah, but since the spot's going to be removed also, therefore it's not permitted. That's why you need a pasuk besar to tell you that still it's allowed to do. Otherwise, we would assume it's prohibited. That's Abaye's answer. Rava says, Afilu tema Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon is always the one that disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda in all of Hilchot Shabbat, but also in non-Hilchot Shabbat. The same idea. He says that davar she'eno mitkaven is mutar. That it's okay. So he says I can even explain this tradition according to Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon even though it's not your intention, it's still not allowed. Right? Only if you're not really sure if it's going to happen or not. But here, once you cut the foreskin and the foreskin has a spot on it, for sure it will get cut off. And so he would agree that it would have been asur, and you need a pasuk to tell you that you can still do the circumcision. Hold on. Doesn't Abaye also agree that according to the Bishimon, if it'll definitely happen, it's still asur? We saw this a number of times. Abaye and Rava both agree that according to the Bishimon, or even if it's not your intention to do something, if it will for sure happen, like cutting off the head of a chicken to get a toy, but for sure it's going to die, still is prohibited. Actually, Abaye agrees now. When Abaye said originally that this is only according to Rabbi Yehuda, that was his original opinion. But after Rava said it could be Rabbi Shimon and this is Pasik Rashe, then he said, oh, you know what, Rava, I agree, you're right. And so that was his second opinion. Okay, good. Now that whole tradition back and forth between Rava and Abaye was applied to a different tradition altogether, Tannaitic tradition. I think this shows that a lot of times these conversations that back and forth were repeated, memorized, but it could be applicable to more than one context. And perhaps it was said in one context, but if it's applicable to another context, then since it's orally memorized, then it would just repeat it and connect it to the second one. And perhaps over time, we weren't sure which is the original context because it does apply to both. So in any case, the Talmud quotes another application of that discussion to this paragraph that says, Pasuk in Devarim says, be careful regarding Spadat. This is the source that says that you can't cut off a leprous spot. La'asot i'ata oseh, aval oseh ata besiv she'al gabe raglo u'bemot she'al gabe ketefo. That means that you cannot cut off a sarat spot on purpose directly. But if you are tying a rope on your foot, or you're carrying something, a rod on your shoulder, and then indirectly that causes the spot to rub off, then you don't have to worry about it. I'm just carrying a pole. My intention here is not to take off the spot. I'm not doing that directly. So all this, we learn from this pasuk only la'asot to do it directly, and indirectly is okay. If I was carrying something and then the spot came off, it came off. It's not my problem. It's allowed. Okay, that's the Tannaitic tradition. That's the Baraita. Now we ask, why do I need the pasuk? So here's the same whole discussion applies equally to this. But this is not my intention. My intention is just to carry a pole. My intention wasn't to take it off. So therefore, even without the extra word la'asot, I would still never not assume that it's prohibited. I would still think it's mutar because of this rule. It says, we need the word la'asot for Rabbi Yehuda, because he says, even if you don't have intention, it's still asur. So that's why I have to tell you it's mutar. Even Rabbi Shimon, who in general says, if you don't have intention, it's okay, but he agrees in this kind of case where it's for sure going to happen, that it's not allowed. How about Abaye? Doesn't Abaye agree to that? You're right. After Rabba said this explanation, Abaye said, you're right. It doesn't have to be only Rabbi Yehuda. This could also be Rabbi Shimon. Okay, so that was the second application of the same thing. Abaye, alibad Rabbi Shimon. Now we're going to go back. When Abaye first said that it's Rabbi Yehuda, then so that in either of these cases, only Rabbi Yehuda needs the extra word besar to teach me that I could do Brit Milah on Shabbat, not Rabbi Shimon. In that case, what does Rabbi Shimon do with that word? I besar, my aviles, an extra word. Amar Rav Amram be'omer la'kotz beharto u'mitkaven. It's talking about a case where, someone says, I want you to cut off the foreskin, but only for the purpose of cutting off the spot, the sarat spot, not for Brit Milah, right? I don't want you to do it for the intention of Brit Milah, although Brit Milah is going to happen anyway, right? Because it's the same act, but that's his intention. So if that's the case, I might have thought that since his kavanah in this case is in fact his main purpose is to cut off the leprous spot. So therefore, it should be asur. The word besar comes to teach me that even though that is my intention, since Brit Milah will be happening anyway, kind of by the way, so therefore it's still allowed. That's what it's teaching according to the Bishim. All right, so that's a good answer for a gadol, tenach gadol. Hatan ma'ika lememad. A gadol can say, someone who's an adult, let's say they're a convert or they never had Brit Milah for whatever reason. So he can say, I want to do Brit Milah to take off the leper spot. But a baby is just lying there. He doesn't have any dot to do one way or the other. So what about the word besar? We saw it comes up twice. So the one in Parashat Tazria, what is that word besar coming to teach? Aramara b'shashia be'omer aviha ben lakos baheret tibno hu kamitkaven. Oh, that's what it's talking about. Where the father is doing the Brit Milah, and he says, I'm going to cut off the foreskin with the intention of removing the leprous spot, not because of Brit Milah. So there I might have thought it's not as prohibited because you can't take off a leprous spot. Comes the word besad, the second one, to tell me that even that is permitted. Although my kavanah is for prohibition, since I'm doing Brit Milah after all, it's okay. Ve'ika acher li'abid acher. דאמר רבי שמעון בן לקיש, כל מקום שאתה מוסה עשה ולא תעשה, אם אתה יכול לקיים שניהם מותר, ואם לאו יבוא עשה, בדחה לא תעשה. Wait a second, in that case, if the father comes and says, I'm doing it for that reason, then, we should tell him it's prohibited. Don't do it, and let's get someone else, right? We'll get another mohel, and let the mohel cut off the foreskin with intention for Brit Milah. And then that'll be for sure good, because even in the case where you have se and lo ta'aseh, and they contradict each other. Even if you need to do one with overriding the other, in this case, let's say do Brit Milah and lo ta'aseh of cutting off the leper state. If you need to, find it overrides. But if you can fulfill both, then you should. So therefore, it's better to go and find a mohel who will do it with kavanah Brit Milah, and then the other one, taking off the leper spot, is without kavanah. And it's without kavanah, and it's okay. And so I don't need, so what do I need that extra word, besar, if I can get another mohel? It must be talking about a case where there is no one else. Only the father is around who can circumcise it. The father insists he's doing it for prohibition, to cut off the leper spot, and not for Brit Milah. Even so, he is allowed to do it. Okay, good. So that concludes that discussion. And now we're going to renew the discussion about Yom Tov. Amar Mor, we said in the daf yesterday, Yom Tov enah hadocha ela bizmana bilvad. If the 8th day falls out on Yom Tov, then you do Brit Milah on Yom Tov. But that's only if it's the 8th day. If it's not bizmana, right? If the baby was sick and we couldn't do it on the 8th day, and then you push it off. Well, once you push it off, you don't do it on Yom Tov. Okay, you got to wait till after Yom Tov to do it. Okay, so what's the source of this? How do I know that I can do Brit Milah on Yom Tov, but not if it's 8th day, but not if it's not the 8th day? So we're going to have several proofs. I think about 4 proofs for this. We're bringing analogies to other types of cases. Amar Chizkiah, v'chen tana debe Chizkiah, Amar Kera, lo totiru mimenu ad boker. שאין תמוד לומר עד בוקר, מה תמוד לומר עד בוקר? כתוב ליתן לו בוקר שני לשרפתו. Okay, the pasuk is talking about the Korban Pesach, right? And it says the Korban Pesach you have to eat that night, one night, right? And it says don't leave any leftovers until the morning. And then it continues this, anything that is left over, you should burn. So it has a repetition in the pasuk. So it says twice. So I know that I can't eat it. I only have to eat it at night. I can't eat it in the morning. Why do I have to need the second ad boker? That's to tell you. The second one is to tell you about the burning. That you don't burn it the first morning, because the first morning will be Yom Tov, right? After all, on Seder night, let's think about. Imagine we're in Israel, right? Where there's only one day of one Yom Tov of Pesach. So that night, I'm eating Korban Pesach. Then the next day is Yom Tov. Don't burn it on Yom Tov. Rather, wait till Chol HaMoed, the second morning, and that's when you should burn it. Okay, so what's the point here? The point is that even though you're allowed to make a fire and you're allowed to cook on Yom Tov, that's only for things you're going to eat. But this Korban, extra leftover Korban, you're not allowed to eat. You have to burn it. And so the pasuk is coming and saying, don't do it on Yom Tov. Right? Even though it's something that is a part of a mitzvah, that you have to burn it, still better to leave it till afterwards if you can. So the analogy too here is, even though Brit Milah is a mitzvah and you must do it, but only if this is the actual 8th day, then it overrides Yom Tov. But if not, then it's like the leftover Korban Pesach. Leave it till Chol HaMoed. Don't do it that day. Okay, so that's proof number 1 from Hizkiah. Abaye Amar Kera, Olat Shabbat be-Shabbato, Velo Olat Chol be-Shabbat, Velo Olat Chol be-Yom Tov. Okay, regarding the daily burnt offering, right? Every day we bring 2 korbanot in the morning and afternoon, including on Shabbat. So it says you bring the olah, the burnt offering of Shabbat, on Shabbat. You're allowed that on Shabbat you can bring itself, but you can't bring olah of whole on Shabbat. In other words, on Friday morning, Friday afternoon, you brought the lamb, the korban tamid. But now that also has leftovers that have to burn later at night. You don't do it on Friday night because you can't burn something that from the chol on Shabbat. Same thing with Yom Tov. So you see, you delay it till afterwards, even though it's a mitzvah, it's an important thing to do. But if you can do it later, you do it later. So therefore, that's a good analogy. Same thing with Brit Milah. Since you don't have to do it this day because you already pushed it off, therefore, do not do Brit Milah on Yom Tov. Wait till after. Okay, good. Rava Amar kerahu levado ye'aseh lachem. Hu velo machshirin levado velo milah shelo bizmana da'atya mikal v'chomer. So Rava says yet another proof also regarding Korban Pesach says achi asher yachel lechol nefesh. Hu levado ye'aseh lachem. On Yom Tov you can't do malacha, but you can do anything that is for food. You can cook, right? So it says who. The word who, that comes to tell you you can do anything that you need to for preparing food, but not machshirin. You can't go cut down a tree to make a fire, because anything you could have done before you do. And levado is a exclusionary word, and that's coming to tell you, yes, you can do all melacha yom tov regarding food, but not berit milah. Levado, not berit milah, that's not at the right time. What's the kavachomer? I would have thought as follows: since I'm allowed to cook food, and that's for my own benefit, so I can enjoy Shabbat. So, right for the Torah, when I don't get any benefit, I might think all the more so that would be allowed. That's why the Vado comes and says, if this is not the 8th day, then you can't do it on that day. Rabashem Shabbaton asehu b'havale yom tov aseh. Yom Tov aseh lo ta'aseh v'naseh doche et lo ta'aseh va'aseh. Okay, since it says regarding Yom Tov, that's a Shabbaton. So Shabbaton means it should be restful, and it also says don't do melacha. So therefore, Yom Tov is a positive commandment and a negative commandment, and so that you can't take a lo ta'aseh, which is Brit Milah, and it will not override the Yom Tov, which is both an Aseh and a Lo Ta'aseh. Right? Brit Milah is only an Aseh, and that's not going to override the Lo Ta'aseh and Aseh together. Okay, good. So that was 4 different proofs that we had that you do not do Yom Tov. You have to do Brit Milah on Yom Tov if it's not the 8th day. Okay. Now the end of the Mishnah from yesterday said, Klal Amar Rabbi Akiva. I said a principle that anything that you can do before Shabbat, you must do before Shabbat and cannot be done on Shabbat. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav halacha Rabbi Akiva. That is, we follow that. We don't follow Rabbi Eliezer. And in fact, we have another Mishnah in Masechet Pesachim that says the same thing. Klal Amar Rabbi Akiva, kol melacha she'efshar la'asot be'erev Shabbat. And adocha et hashabbat. The case if the Leil HaSeder, right, fell out on Saturday night, so that means I would have to be preparing the Korban Pesach in the times of Bet HaMikdash on Shabbat afternoon. Okay, so what do? Well, we have to prepare the Korban Pesach on Shabbat afternoon because that's the 14th, right? So we have to. However, we only do what we have to do. Anything that I could have done before Shabbat, I must do before Shabbat, like bringing the knife, catching the animal. All those things have to be before Shabbat. But shechita, Shabbat, I can't do shechita before Shabbat. Right? That's the main thing I got to do on Yud Daled. So that dochat Shabbat, that does override Shabbat. And Akiva in that case as well. So Rabbi Akiva says the same halacha twice. Once here regarding doing Brit Milah on Shabbat, and once here preparing Korban Pesach on Shabbat. In both cases, only what you need to do on Shabbat you're allowed, but not any preparation that you could have done before. Now, why does he have to say the halacha in both of these cases? Couldn't I just say it by one and I would figure out the other one? Utzricha, I need both. הטעם הוא דמכשילין אפשר לעשות מאתמול, לא דחו שבת דלקה כרת. Well, if I had only regarding Brit Milah, I would say regarding Brit Milah, that's when the preparations do not override Shabbat because there's no prohibition of karet. Aval Pesach dika karet and malit chul Shabbat. If I don't do Korban Pesach, that's karet. So therefore, you see, Korban Pesach is more important, more stringent, and that's why I would think on Korban Pesach. Right. That's why I would think on Brit Milah, I cannot override Shabbat for preparations, but on Pesach, which is karet, I would override. Okay. By the way, if you don't do Brit Milah, also it's karet, but that's only if you just don't do it at all permanently. If you just push it off and don't do it at the right time, it's not karet. So far the person didn't say he's not doing it at all. Okay. That's V'yishmin and Gabek Pesach. If I make the limitation that I cannot override Shabbat for preparations, if Rebbe Kiva taught that to us regarding Pesach, I would say only Pesach mishum delo nichletu aleh shelosh esrei beritot. Aval Milah nichletu aleh shelosh esrei beritot em alidchu Shabbat. So I would say only on Pesach you cannot do the preparations on Shabbat according to Rebbe Kiva. But Brit Milah is more important because it says the word Berit 13 times when regarding Avraham. And so therefore, you see, Brit Milah is more important, and therefore I might think that Brit Milah, since it's more important, I can violate Shabbat even for the preparations, and that's what Rabbi Akiva, the Mishnah, has to tell us in both contexts that I can violate Shabbat for the mitzvah itself, but not for the preparations. Okay, good. So that concludes the discussion of that Mishnah, the first Mishnah. And now we go to the second one, which is going to be a lot of the details of the stages of actually doing Brit Milah. So let's see what they are. Osin kol sorche milah b'Shabbat. You can do all the steps necessary for the circumcision itself on Shabbat. Mohalin, that means cutting off the skin, the foreskin. For the ayin, this is the membrane under the skin itself, which we also cut and cut or fold back. So that we also do on Shabbat. It's necessary. Motzitzin is draw or suck the blood from the wound, which they thought was good medical advice. And also putting on a bandage and cumin. Ispelanit is a nice Greek word meaning a bandage. So these things, the first couple are necessary for the Brit Milah itself. You have to cut and pull back. And the last two are necessary for medicinal purposes. And so, since this is a serious wound, so we can violate Shabbat in order to make sure that it heals properly. Okay. Im lo shachak me'erev Shabbat. Now, let's say you did not. The cumin that you put on has to be ground. But if you forgot and you didn't grind the cumin before, again, this follows a Rebbe Akiva. Since you could have ground the cumin before, you have to do it before. Now what do you do? So just crush it with your teeth, and then you can put it on. All right, so not so sanitary in our standards today, but back then they thought that saliva was actually good for a wound and had healing purposes, so that would be a problem. In this kind of case, what we're doing is we're saying, don't grind it because you could do it with your teeth. The truth is that this is chole sheyesh po sakana, can get infected. It could be very bad. So, if there was no other way, if you needed to violate Shabbat for medicinal purposes, then you certainly would be allowed. But this Mishnah is assuming that since you can get away with a lower level prohibition, so you may as well. In order to make that bandage, they would put on the bandage a mixture of wine and oil and mix it vigorously. So that you could have done before Shabbat, that mixing, and then just apply it. If you didn't, if you forgot, then you can't prepare it that way on Shabbat, but rather you put some oil, you put some wine, you put them both on the bandage or on the wound separately, and then they'll mix on the spot. So in other words, if you can get away without violating a doraita, then you do. And that's only the banan, actually, anyway, this mixing. But okay, you do the least prohibition as possible. Also, making a bandage that kind of looked like a pouch that would go right over the wound. So you can't make that or bring it with you and carry lechatechila. But you take a rag and then you fashion a bandage out of it. If you didn't bring that kind of bandage, again, the chaluk before, then here's another way you can do it. You can just put the bandage on your finger and carry it on your heart. That doesn't have an eruv, it's still okay. I mean, so we allow leniency to be able to have that bandage. But obviously, the best thing to do is, in this case, to prepare all that material beforehand. Okay, that's the Mishnah. Now the Gemara is going to analyze Mikedi katanekulehu kosor chemilala toyemai. Mishnah said you do all the things for a milah, and then it gives a list of all the things. So since it gives a detailed list, why do I need this general statement, osim kol sor milah? What is that coming to include? Must be something that's besides what's on the list. I mean, the Bashat of the Mishnah, this might just be a heading and then the details. But the Talmud always likes to read the general statement as its own statement. And so what is that coming to include? The Tanur Banan Hamal, Kol Zaman Shu Osek B'Milah, Choser Ben Al Sisin HaMakabin Et HaMilah, Ben Al Sisin She'en Makabin Et HaMilah, Peresh, Al Sisin HaMakabin Et HaMilah, Choser, Al Sisin She'en Makabin Et HaMilah, Eno Choser. Okay, so the extra word, called the extra phrase, the generality of Mishnah, is coming to add, to kind of hint to this baraita. There's a very important rule here. The baraita says that if you're doing Brit Milah on Shabbat, as long as you're in the act of doing the Brit Milah, in other words, you're right there on the spot, you're cutting, then you can make sure to cut all of the shreds that are necessary for the Brit Milah to be a kosher or even the shreds of skin that are around that you don't need to technically to fulfill the Brit Milah. You can cut all of them on the spot. However, once you stopped, right, and you closed up, you wrapped up the baby, right, went back, and even though it's still Shabbat, you can go back and check if you see that there are more pieces of skin, shreds of skin that are necessary for the Brit Milah, you have to take off, then you go back and take them off. If there are other pieces of skin that are necessary, just optional, then you can't do it because it's Shabbat, and you can't go and violate Shabbat again and wound the baby and cause bleeding if not necessary. Okay, what is this all talking about in reality? I had a conversation today with Mickey Abraham, our Mohel, and reviewed some of the details. Okay, so you can always consult him if you want more details, but the idea is like this, that on the member there's skin, and underneath the skin there's a membrane, and so you need to cut off the majority of it in order for the Brit Milah to be kosher. And nowadays we do that because most Mohalim, they use a clamp, and then with one cut they're cutting both the membrane and the skin underneath. So that's the brit and the piri'ah also are done at once. But in those days, it seems they might cut separately. And so since it involves many cuts, so you need to cut 51%. You need to cut the majority of it. So if you didn't cut the majority of it, then you can go back anytime on Shabbat and make sure to cut the majority. But the point is, if on the spot you can keep cutting as much as you want, but after you finish cutting, then on Shabbat you can't go back and cut the rest of it. Okay, that's the Braita, and so that's what the Mishnah is coming to add this halacha. Mantana Peresh and Choser. Who is the author of this statement that once you stopped the act, whatever that is, according to Rambam, that just means one cut. It looks like the pshat is, the one session of operating. So once, who is the opinion that says once you finish, you can't go back and then cut the things, the parts of skin that are optional that you don't need to? Who says that? We're going to have a few different options. Again, comparing it to other cases that are similar. Amar Rabba bar Chana Amar Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi Ishmael beno shel Rabbi Yochanan ben Berokahi Tanya Arba'a Asar shachal liot b'Shabbat ומפשיט אדם הפסח עד החזה, דברי רבי ישמעאל בנו של רבי יוחנן בן ברוקה. חכמים אומרים, מפשיטין את כולו. We had this braita some dafim ago, and it goes as follows. Again, if we're talking about preparing the Korban Pesach on Shabbat, and so you're allowed to do it, but it should be as minimal as possible. So in that case, you need to sacrifice the internal organs of the Korban Pesach. You have to do it on Shabbat. So first you have to take off the skin, because you can't just go in and take out the organs when the skin is on, the hair gets on them, it burns, it smells, it's not nice. So you got to skin it. So the first opinion, Rabbi Ishmael here says, you skin it halfway, right, revealing the chest area where the organs are. And then you take out the organs, you sacrifice them, and you leave it like that, because the rest of the skinning, that's only for yourself so that you can go and barbecue the rest of the animal and eat. But that's later. So you only do it until there. And then Chachamim say, no, once you're skinning, you can skin the whole thing. That way it stays cooler, it stays fresh, it's nicer to do it that way. So what you see here is that according to the Bishmael, you do the minimum amount, right? Whatever is absolutely necessary only. And so too, that would be similar to the Brit Milah, where once you finish cutting, during the cut you can do whatever you want. But after you finish, then you cannot go back and do things that are optional. That's similar to the Korban Pesach. Korban Pesach, what you would usually do is they would skin it halfway. And in any case, take out the organs and then finish skinning it. So since they stopped in the middle, which they always stop in the middle, so then you can't go back on Shabbat and skin the rest. And so that's the same as going back in the Brit Milah and taking off the optional sections of skin, which is not allowed. So that's the analogy. So he must be the author of this baraita. Mimai, hold on, maybe not. Ad kan lo kama Rabbi Yishmael beno shel Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroka mishum dela ba'enan ze eli ve'anvehu. Aval hachad ve'enan ze ve'anvehu hachanameh. Hold on, regarding Brit Milah and other mitzvot, we have a special pasuk from Az Yashir that says, "This is my God, I will glorify Him." You should always don't do a mitzvah in the minimal way. Always do it in a glorious way, and so therefore in a beautiful way. Therefore, regarding Brit Milah, the beautiful way to do it, is to take off all the skin, and so therefore that's important. Even if Yishmael would agree. Whereas regarding Korban Pesach, once you flay it halfway and take out the organs, you fulfilled your obligation of what you need to do in terms of the sacrifice of it. And so that mitzvah is done. And so there's no specific mitzvah for flaying the rest of it. And so here's a proof from Baraita that says this concept. This is my God, and I will glorify Him. How can we glorify God is the basic question, right? What can us, mere humans, mortals, do to glorify infinite, transcendent, divine being? So rather, we can't do anything to make God greater, but what we can do is we can do the mitzvot in a beautiful way. So we don't just sit in a bare sukkah. We make a beautiful one with decorations. We get a nice lulav, a nice shofar, a beautiful sisit, and Sefer Torah. We're going to write it with nice ink and a nice quill, and we're going to get an expert writer, and we're going to put it in a beautiful case. Right? That's all not absolutely necessary, but that's the nice way to do it. In that same baraita, Shaul disagrees and says, "Ve'anvehu mahu chanun v'rachum afatah chanun v'rachum." Shaul says, no, you can actually be a glorified God. How? He reads this Anvehu as ani vahu, me and God. If you are like God, if you act according to in God's ways and be merciful like He is merciful, then that is a way of glorifying God. So that's a disagreement here. We're following the Tanakh Kama and says you have to make mitzvot beautiful, and so too the Bishmael, the son of Rabbi Yochanan Beroka, he could say that only regarding Korban Pesach, where it's not part of the mitzvah. Once I finish the mitzvah, I flayed half of it. That's all I have to do. There's no extra mitzvah to flay the whole thing. So that's where you shouldn't do it. But regarding Brit Milah, where you want to do it in a beautiful way, there he would agree that you can go. He might agree that you can go back and take off all of the skin, even the optional parts. So it's not necessarily he's not necessarily the author. Ela amar Rav Asher hamaneh Rabbi Yosef he ditnan ben shenir'eh ba'alil ben shelo nir'ah ba'alil mechalilin alav et Shabbat. Rabbi Yosef Omer nir'ah ba'alil el mechalin et alav et Shabbat. Okay, little background for this Mishnah is Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah, and so we're talking about in olden days they would base the Rosh Chodesh on eyewitness. Eyewitness would come and say, "Oh, I came, I saw the new moon." They would come to the Sanhedrin in Yerushalayim in the Bet Mikdash. Now, the first opinion says if there is a clear moon, then not everybody, not all witnesses have to come. We're talking about on Shabbat. There's a law that even if you live far away, you can travel and violate Shabbat in order to come to the Supreme Court in Jerusalem to tell them you saw the new moon. In other words, the seeing of the new moon, establishing of the calendar is so important that it overrides Shabbat. Okay, so now what if a lot of people come? Well, you need that. You need a lot of people to come because maybe you never know if someone else saw it. Maybe it's cloudy in some other spot. Maybe you're the only one that saw the new moon. So you got to go and travel, even though you're not allowed to travel long distances on Shabbat. You violate Shabbat for the sake of witnessing the new moon. Now, what if it's a case where it's a very clear moon and you live outside Jerusalem and you're like, I know for sure that the people in Jerusalem saw it also. And so therefore you're thinking, maybe I shouldn't violate Shabbat. The Tanakh Kama in this Mishnah says, whether it's seen clearly or not, you should still go. Okay? No matter what, you still go. You violate Shabbat. The Yosef says, no, if it's a clear moon, then you should not violate Shabbat if you live far away. Because you could assume that there are other people that live closer and they were there. So anyway, what's the point? We see that this is like an optional thing, right? And yet the Tanakh Kama says, although your testimony is optional, still do it. So they would say that optional pieces of skin, go back and cut them off. Whereas the Yosef says, no, only if you're a necessary witness you can go, but not if you're an optional witness. That's parallel to the parts of skin that are optional. Don't cut them off and don't violate Shabbat. So it looks like the Yosef would be the author here. Now we reject that, we question that. Mimai, Dimad Kana Kama Rabbi Yosef Hatam, Velo Nitena Shabbat Lidachot, Aval Hachad, Nitena Shabbat Lidachot, Hachi Nameh. No, that's all. In the case of Brit Milah, we already established you're violating Shabbat to do the Brit Milah. So there, I might think, once I'm violating Shabbat and I'm allowed to, so then I can finish the whole thing, right? In one session, in two sessions, doesn't matter. But here, the thing with the witness, the reason why the Bio says Mahmid is because this person does not even come under the category of someone who is allowed to desecrate Shabbat, right? Because he's not an important witness. There are other witnesses. So since he never gets a heter to violate Shabbat at all. So that's why he can't come. So that case is different. And so he's not necessarily the author either. Ella, Amrei Nehardeh, the rabbis from the Hardah give another opinion about who the author is of our Baraita. Rabbanan de Peliga led Rabbi Yosef. The rabbis that disagree with Rabbi Yosef, not in that context, but another Mishnah. This is Mishnah in Menachot. Ditnan Abba Kohanim Nichnasin Shenayim Beyadam Shedeh Sedarim. The Mishnah is talking about the Lechem Apanim. This was in the Bet HaMikdash, in Mishkan, the Bet HaMikdash. We have 12 loaves that are out all week long, and they should be out as Tamid. It should always be there. And they last for a week, and on Shabbat, they are changed out for 12 new ones, and then the Kohanim eat the old ones. So the first opinion says, when we change them out, we want to do it in a way that it will never be empty. Okay, so we change it in such a way that as the one set of Kohanim remove the old ones, the next set of Kohanim are right there pushing in the new ones, right, adjacent to the old ones, so that it's never empty at all. So that's how they're describing it in detail, that there's 4 Kohanim that are coming in, and 2 of them are holding 6 loaves each, and 2 of them are holding the bowls of frankincense, which you have to bring with them. And there's another set of 4 on the other side, and 2 of them, 2 of them are taking off the loaves, 6 each, and 2 of them are taking off the bowls of frankincense from last week. המכניסים עומדים בצפון לפניהם לדרום. העושים עומדים בדרום ופניהם לצפון. And so they each stand on two sides, one on this side facing this way, the other's on the other side facing the other way. אלו מושכים ואלו מניחים, טפחו של זה בצד טפחו של זה, משום שמה לפני השם תמיד. And as one is pulling them out, the other one is pushing them in. Right there, the hand breadth of one alongside the other, so that they should be there always. There shouldn't even be 1 second where they are separated. The Biyoseh, however, in that same Mishnah says, says you don't have to do all that. You can come in, take them away, and then a few minutes later or an hour later, you bring in the new ones. That's still called tamid. Tamid means that it shouldn't go a whole day, a whole night without any bread there. But a few minutes without bread there, that's okay. What's the relevance here? Well, in this case, right, we said that if it's the same operating period, right, then I can remove all the skin. But if I come back later, I can't, right, because that's a separate operating period. Rabbi Yosef, since over here he says that you can wait an hour as long as it's within the same day, it's okay. So too he would say that even if I did the Brit Milah now, and then I went back to the room later and I noticed and I saw there's some extra skin, I can go back and cut the extra skin. Both the time periods are considered one. Just because there's some time in between doesn't really separate them into two acts. They're really all one act, just like you can say tamid regarding the morning and later in the morning of the Shtei HaLechem. Okay, so therefore it could be the opinion here of it could be the opinion of Rabbanan, right? The Rabbanan here are the ones that say it has to be back to back, because if there's any separation of time, then it's a separation. So too, they would say regarding Brit Milah, the separation of time, it's two operations. Once it's two different operations, I can only cut off all the skin in the first operation, but not in the second. So our Mishnah could be according to Rabbanan. Whereas Rabbi Yosef would say, even if it's separated in time, it does not separate. And so he would say, I can go back all day and take off all the skin I want. Okay, good. So now that we have that opinion, Tanu Rabbanan, Mehalketina Tamila, Ivim Lo Hilkit Anush Karet. Another baraita, so we resolved that one, but this one says you can, the laket is like to gather or to complete the cutting of the foreskin. If it didn't finish, you could finish cutting the foreskin. If you didn't, and then Shabbat finished, you get karet. Why? Karet for violating Shabbat, because now you caused a wound on Shabbat, and it was not a proper Brit Milah. So you don't have an excuse that I was doing a Brit Milah. Here you just wounded someone on Shabbat. Okay, that's what the Braita says. And now, again, this author question. Maneh, who is the author? Sorry, not who's the author. Maneh is asking, who gets karet? Right, the baby gets karet? Right, who gets karet? So the first option is, it's the mohel, Amar Uman, the expert. The mohel, the operator, he gets karet because he caused a wound on Shabbat, and it was not in the context of Brit Milah because he didn't finish the steps necessary for Brit Milah. At Kifla Rav Papa rejects this. Uman lema lehu ana abde palga de misvah atun abdi tu palga de misvah. Hold on, the mohel could come and say, I started the mitzvah and I didn't finish, but you should have finished, right? In other words, if you had two people doing the operation, back to back, and one started cutting and the other one finished the cutting, so then they would both be okay, right? They both be patur because they did Brit Milah. So the first one could say, it's not my fault that you didn't finish. You should have finished the job. So Ela Mar Papa Gadol. Rather, he says it's an adult, the person who needs to get the Brit Milah himself. He gets karet because he doesn't have a Brit Milah, right? And that's the general rule. Wait a second, if it's an adult, we already have a pasuk explicitly. That's the pasuk in Bereshit that says any adult who doesn't have Brit Milah, he gets karet. So I don't need to learn this, especially from this baraita. Why would this baraita come to tell us something that's explicitly in a pasuk? It's going to go back to the original. That it's the expert, it's the mohel who gets karet. For example, it's a case where Shabbat is almost over. There's only a few seconds left before Shabbat. And the people tell him, you're not going to have time to do a whole brit milah, to finish the brit milah. And he says, I have time. I'm very fast. And sure enough, he starts the brit milah and doesn't have time to finish the brit milah before Shabbat's over. And turns out, all he did was make a wound, which violates Shabbat, and he did not fulfill brit milah, and that person would get a punishment of keren. Okay, that's that braita. Okay, good. Now we go on to the next item in the Mishnah that says not only allowed to cut, but you're also allowed to suck blood from the wound. In fact, they thought this was so important. This is like sakanat nefashot. If you didn't do it, that might relate to bloodletting. Remember we saw before. It's good to take it out. Blood has infection, and so you got to get it out. And that combined with the saliva, they thought that this was very important to do, to the point that they said that any mohel that doesn't do it, we fire him because it's endangering the child. This is obvious. Since we can violate Shabbat, because drawing blood is violating Shabbat. That's right. And so yet the Mishnah says you have to do it. So that shows that you would only say you have to do it on Shabbat if it's not the sakana nefashot. That teaches us that it would be dangerous not to do it, mortal danger. But the Mishnah still has to tell us this, because I might have thought that blood that comes out is already left, and it's already just pooled blood that I'm drawing out. And since I'm not drawing it from the person's body, it wouldn't violate Shabbat. And so the Mishnah has to tell us that I must do it on Shabbat, because that's teaching us that, in fact, this blood is part of the body, and I'm drawing it out, and it does violate Shabbat, yet it's all permitted. Okay. Of course, nowadays we know that this is based on false science, and putting one's mouth through the wound, with the mouth, I think, is the most germy part of the body. And so mohel, putting his mouth to the wound, is a very dangerous and very, very bad idea. And so that's why, if anyone who is involved with Milah should make sure the mohel does not do this. I mean, it's the opposite effect. If you're really concerned about health, and that was the whole point of this, then one should not do mesitzah with one's mouth directly on the wound. And I am sure if the rabbis were around today and knew about germs, then that's what they would teach as well. Okay, so a lot of mohalim will do it in a different way, through a tube or something, so that it's sanitary. Now the other item you should do for reasons of health is put on the bandage and cumin. And so, right, just like not doing these things is a danger, so too, right, it's just noting that it's back to back. Just like not putting a bandage in cumin is a danger, so too not drawing the blood is also a danger. All right, well, that's, according to their medicine. Okay, and put the bandage. This is my mother told me, or my nurse told me, that ispelanita de kulehon kibe shab minai talba v'chada kira v'amar kira v'kabla rishina. So this bandage that we make, Abaye said that any bandage you can make for any wound, you put 7 parts of fat and 1 part wax, that mixture, and that will heal it. Rava said that it should be made out of wax and sap from a tree. Okay, good. So now here's a funny story. That Ashar Rava b'mechoza karinu b'nei min yomeh asya lemanaihu. Rava gave a derasha. He gave a public lecture in mechoza. That's where he lived, as yeshiva was, and he said in public, "This is how you make the mixture for the bandage." And the b'nei min yomeh, they were doctors. They tore their clothes in mourning. Why? Because they lost their whole business. Right? They had copyright of the formula, how to make such a thing. So everybody needed to come to them to get it. And now Rava just revealed the secret formula, and they lost their entire business. So they tore their clothes in mourning. Amar lehu, Rava says, no, don't worry, shivaki lechu hada. I left you one thing and one formula that I didn't say in public, and so you can make money off of that. Amar Shmuel hayman de mashe apeh, elana geb tuba nikirule haspanita. Maitakante limshe tuba b'mayad silka. If someone who washes his face and doesn't wipe it off well, then the person will get sores or scabs on his face. And what should he do? Well, here, he didn't tell this in public. He said he should wash with beet water. And so he told this to the doctors. He said, you hold on to that formula, and anyone has their problem, you just make some beet water, and you can still keep your practice open just based on that. Okay. So we saw some really fascinating things. I mean, that's kind of roundabout. We're talking about the fact that you can do B'nai Milah on Shabbat, but within that, Mishnah lists all the things that one must do, and this is a major source for all of the details of how exactly to perform B'nai Milah. Baruch Adonai Olam. Amen.